Hi, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. I don't want to make an overgeneralization because overgeneralizations are almost always wrong or imprecise. But I wanted to convey something that I felt in my heart about a way to reach out, to touch the hearts of people in the third world. And I really hope that there are people in the third world who are listening to my words right now. And not only to my words, there are a number of other Maoist third worldists who produce podcasts online. And so I feel in listening to their words, I hope that the same kind of spirit is being conveyed, a spirit of concern, a spirit of love, a spirit of empathy. And I feel as though one of the major things which is lacking in my part of the world, the United States of America, is that deep sense of heart. Whenever I have traveled to the third world, and I've only been to two different countries, the Republic of the Congo and Mexico. I hope eventually to go to more. I feel inspired to go to more, and I think I will eventually, because that part of the world draws me to it. I feel a sense of attraction, almost a magnetic attraction pulling me to the third world. That's why I moved down here. That's why I moved to the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, 3 miles north of the Rio Grande Valley in Mexico. One of the main characteristics I noticed in my experience being in the third world was a sense of love, a sense of heart. What people used to call the right brain, I haven't heard that term used in a long time, but right brain versus left brain. Left brain meaning more rational, intellectual, cerebral way of approaching thought, and right brain being the more insightful, intuitive, emotional way of approaching thought. And both involve thought. Thought is present in all parts of the world. We are, in a sense, defined to a large extent by our thoughts, by our reflections, by our meditations, what we think, especially what we think about each other. And my sense is that the way in which people in the first world communicate, and again, I realize that this is an overgeneralization. Everything I'm saying in this video is an overgeneralization. There are exceptions to all the points I am making. I know that. But generally speaking, I would say that the most outstanding, the most attractive part of the third world to me is its sense of heartfulness. The power of thought, the power of the mind, the power of the mental faculties, imagination, thought, comprehension, memory, driven by the heart, not driven by pure rationality or logic. Now, there is a place for all of those things. There is a place for the so-called left brain and the so-called right brain. And I realize those are more metaphorical than literal. It isn't as if literally the two sides of the brain are one or the other. But the tendency of people in the Western world like myself is to approach issues of oppression and struggle and capitalism from a very rational, a very logical viewpoint, meaning that we look at the struggles of the third world and we try to think of solutions. It's a solution-focused way of thinking, a problem-focused way of thinking, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There are problems in the third world. There are problems in the first world, and those problems need solutions. The issue is, where do we find them? Do we find them through logic? Or do we find them buried in the human heart? And I think if I am going to put my ultimate trust in the third world, my hope that after the capitalist world system, as my fellow sociologist Immanuel Wallerstein called it, decays, becomes decrepit, and eventually fades from existence, that I have to think about what it is that is needed by the remnant, by those people who remain in the third world, by the survivors, by those people who are left after the rest of us, like me, for example, are gone. Now, I'm an old man, relatively, at 67, not as old as some, but a lot older than most. And I suspect that my time living in this world is not that much longer. Whatever that much longer is, I have no idea. It might be 20 years, might be 25 years, but most likely not much more than that. So I don't foresee myself as being an eyewitness to the events which will, sooner or later, transpire in the third world. But nonetheless, I think they will, or at least they will have the possibility of transpiring in the third world. And for that, I think that if I, in this role that I'm taking upon myself now as a podcaster, am going to communicate my desires and my thoughts to people in the third world, that I can't be content with mere logical evaluations. Doesn't mean that logical evaluation has no place. Of course, we need logical evaluation. But what I have seen in my trips to the third world is that there is less of a focus on pure logic, not an abandonment of logic, but it's not emphasized as much, and more of a focus on the language of the heart, something which is very rarely seen here in the West. Let me give you one example from today. I was driving home from the pharmacy, picking up my medications, and I was driving down the service road to Interstate 2, one of the newest, if not the newest, interstate in the United States. It's not yet completed. It is completed right around here, but if you want to go to other parts of the United States or even to other parts of Texas, you can't get there on interstates. At some point, actually not too far from where I live, the interstate simply ends, and you are forced to go onto US and in some cases rural highways. So as I was driving home, I noticed that coming out of a fast food restaurant, there was a van wanting to leave. Now, it's not as if I was blocking traffic. I wasn't. There was a red light about maybe 50 feet ahead of me, and there was a car at that light. So there literally was no place to go. So by my stopping and giving the opportunity to this person to come out onto frontage road, which actually he did not, I'm not sure why, maybe he was thinking about something else, wasn't paying attention to me. This car behind me started slamming his hands on the horn. There is a lot of road rage in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. Exactly why, I don't know. I have my suspicions, but I don't really know. There's a lot of anger in general in this part of the United States. Tremendous anger. A lack of heart. A lack of sympathy. A lack of empathy. A lack of what philosopher Edmund Husserl called intersubjectivity, the ability to relate my own subjective thoughts, my own empathy to the heart of another person. Intersubjectivity really is a way of talking about empathy in a philosophical way. We don't have much of that in the first world. We have some, and there are certain places that empathy is much more apparent. I have lived in places like that, but they are, in my experience, few and far between. When I have been in the third world, I have seen exactly the opposite. That most places are dominated by empathy, by intersubjectivity, and what is rarer is to see a purely logical individual or a purely logically based conversation. And so if I am going to communicate my vision of Maoism, third worldism, to hopefully some people who might be watching me now on YouTube who live in the third world, I feel as though I need to return to my own memories of being in the third world. Now, this is actually a thought that I just had. It never occurred to me before for some reason, but I will try to practice it from now on, at least to an extent. I can't guarantee I will always do it or I will always be successful, but what I'm trying to get across is the fact that I do love the third world. And if there is one thing that Maoism, third worldism needs to be about, if it's one thing that Maoism, third worldism needs to be centered upon, it is that sense of love, that sense of empathy, that sense of intersubjectivity, where my heart is speaking to your heart, where the hearts of those of us in the dying first world are addressing the hearts of those in the third world. So that's about all I really wanted to say. I don't want to go on ad infinitum. There's no point. That is the germ of what occurred to me. And I think it's important to convey it. Because if I speak purely in the language of a first worlder, which of course is my tendency since I am a first worlder, I was born and raised in one of the veritable capitals of the first world, New York City. It's difficult for me to kind of step outside of my comfort zone. It's easier for me to remain on the path of least resistance, which is the path of logic, largely. But I question whether an entirely logical mode of discourse will reach the hearts of those who need it. People who are suffering, people who are starving, people who are sick, people who are homeless. I have seen you. I have seen you, not you particularly, but I have seen you. I know the conditions that many of you live in. Are there some people here who live in similar conditions? Yes, but nowhere near as many. And however poor a person in the United States might be, when you compare that poverty to the poverty in the third world, it is really nothing. So I hope that you take what I'm saying in the spirit in which I intended. I'm certainly not trying to talk down to you, and I really hope that what I'm saying does not come across that way. I'm trying to talk up to you, to elevate you, to recognize that you, I believe, are the future of humanity, not me, not my friends, not my associates, not those around me, not those who live in my condo neighborhood, but people like you, the person who was listening. This has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Maoist Third Worldist Collective. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.